I'm Raymond Massey, and I have a special message for senior citizens. Today's doctors, drugs, and medical devices truly work medical miracles for young and old alike. But there are some as phony as a $3 bill. Like this Zeret applicator, for example, which is claimed to cure arthritis with Z-rays. There are no Z-rays. This fake device claimed to cure cancer with tape-recorded music. The practitioner who used it was as big a phony as his device. A doorbell doctor sold this food supplement to treat 42 diseases. It has nothing of value that's not contained in the food you buy at your supermarket. Investigate before you invest in health services or products. Help stamp out quackery.
This has been a public service announcement from the Food and Drug Administration in cooperation with this station.
Be on your toes. Do not believe that just because the FDA has said a product is safe and effective, that it is either safe or effective.
The more that we uncovered, it was like uncovering a stone and expecting to see one worm there, and we just instead found this whole
bunch of worms.
Right.
A whole lot of worms.
A whole lot of worms.
And whenever you hear that the FDA is the industry's henchman, that's a very accurate statement.
And then we're seeing an increase in all of these other problems that are neurologically related, like language problems in the children, limited intellectual ability, lower IQ. All kinds of neurological, neurodegenerative diseases are increasing. And it's all based on the fact that we just keep adding more and more toxic influences to the child, even before birth, but all the way through birth and throughout adulthood.
Causes all these things. In fact, last week, this week, they have filed RICO racketeering charges against the Nutri-Sweet Company.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the American Diabetes Association, Monsanto Chemical Company. But for instance, it reciprocates diabetes.
The point that the FDA is making is not that the events are not occurring. The point they are making is that they cannot approve they're occurring. One of the major points they make is that in examining seizure cases, they cannot rule out other possible causes of seizures. The very process they use, however, means that they also are unable to rule out NutraSweet. It is very important to understand that the FDA has not ruled out NutraSweet.
It was originally approved in 1974, and we objected. And then all the process occurred that kept it off the market until 1981. Then it was finally, the commissioner overruled all of the other decision makers that had said it should not be marketed in 1981. Now, from my point of view, that demonstrated the point I was trying to make, which is that the regulatory process is not capable of withstanding the political and economic assault of a corporation with its mind made up and with the willpower to effectively force its will.
The FDA made it appear as if they were listening to people, and they were just taking information. And when they took that information, it got filed. Nothing happened to it. I'll tell you that for a fact.
The agency will remain in close contact with those who are skeptical of aspartame safety. For example, the center has met with Dr. Richard Workman of MIT to discuss a number of his hypotheses about aspartame. The center has also met with the Aspartame Consumer Safety Network to discuss issues relating to the safety of aspartame.
But I also saw the FDA come and just completely try to annihilate all of those statements that had been presented by these researchers showing that it caused harm. And they ignored everything that had been said. And other researchers were presented to refute ours and really to make them into somewhat of a laughing stock in the eyes of their peers. They were denigrated as researchers, and their science was called junk science.
You would call me up and said, I just had a reaction, and I realized that it had aspartame in it. And I know that when I'm not taking aspartame-laced products, that I'm fine. And the moment I get this, I get blurred vision and a headache, or I can't keep my balance, or whatever it is. And so the FDA eventually got tired of all the complaints.
We have numerous instances of people calling the FDA and saying, we feel there is a connection, what information do you have? And the person that answered the phone that they're speaking to telling them there is no connection between NutraSweet and side effects and not taking any further information. We have reported this to the FDA and discussed it with them, and I believe it's very important to understand. My understanding when we finished that meeting was they were going to correct that process by having all NutraSweet calls referred to an appropriate official, so that any suggestion that the number of complaints received prior to August of 1987, when we met with the FDA, indicates all the calls that were received by FDA is an inaccurate presentation.
So they just made it all go away by setting up a different hotline, not documenting all of the phone calls properly, not being able to give anybody any information. It was just they were receiving data from the general public regarding aspartame and did absolutely nothing about it. That's where we're at right now as we sit here and chat.
Since the August meeting, there have been instances of individuals calling the FDA and then being referred to the AIDS hotline. To the what? The AIDS hotline. When the AIDS hotline was answered, the individual said, we're taking the NutraSweet calls because we don't get enough of them now to have an independent hotline for NutraSweet. You gotta be kidding. I'm not kidding. That is an event that occurred.
I had heard in my travels a lot of people talking about aspartame being, suboptimal, but I sort of ignored it. It was your story and then your film that got me to really understand the metabolism of it and to really delve into it. And I think the data is overwhelming that people need to take a second look at this.
You got a little bit better, then you noticed you worsened with this Listerine, and you made the association, and then what happened? You kind of got, hey, what's this? And you started doing research, trying to track down if there were any a body of information about the connection.
Yeah, absolutely. At first, when I was diagnosed with MS, I was just, flabbergasted and floored and tried to find out. I asked my neurologist if there was anything nutritionally I could do to help myself, and I was told that there was nothing I could do, that even though she didn't take Diet Cokes herself, there was no reason in her mind why I shouldn't be consuming them.
Headaches, memory problems, insomnia, dizziness, and vision problems, including pain and pressure in the eyes. These findings are consistent with symptoms found to be caused by aspartame, along with diarrhea, nightmares, and nausea in a study. And I'm sorry we don't have the study cited, but Rodale didn't include citations. Dr. Cabin advises aspartame users to tell their doctors
of the consumption of aspartame, even if they have no adverse symptoms.
So the publishers had a problem with your stance on aspartame?
They did. They had a problem with my stance on virtually everything.
What happened with your publisher?
I was just reading, when I read the part about the question, is just a little bit of aspartame okay for your kids? That paragraph is in there because the publisher just really wanted to believe that none of this was true. He was really, I'm talking about the editor actually at Rodale. He really wanted to think that Dr. Cabin was going overboard, was just being much too fussy and extreme, and that really we don't have to say no to our kids when they want the occasional diet soda. And Dr. Cabin would not give in, and he said, no, it's never okay. And I really have to admire him for that, because it did cause some, I'm going to say, conflicts with the editor. The editor did not like it.
The patient I just saw just before you came into my office was an attorney who has problems with memory and attention deficit disorder, And she realizes that aspartame is a problem for her, and she is addicted to it. She has real difficulty stopping it.
Oh, so is that common?
Oh, it's very common.
We felt that there was enough evidence to link it in the studies with behavioral issues. And the more I read about aspartame, the more scared I became of it. And I have nothing good to say about the other food additives, but they don't scare me the way aspartame does. So we thought about it for a long time. We consulted with our professional advisors. We looked at the literature, at the science behind it, and we concluded that we should name it specifically, not just lump it under artificial flavors.
But usually if I see someone drink diet soda, I'm like, no, you idiot, drink juice instead, because that stuff is really bad for you. And you're like, well, I'm only drinking it a day. I'm like, a day? Dude, that's more than you think. Because if you, like 2 cans of aspartame you drink could mess up your brain. So
there has been a lot of articles written by not only military pilots, the military knows about this, the airline certainly knows about it. The question is, if this stuff is as bad as it's supposed to be, and you have all these professional pilots and flight attendants that are going to the company and saying, look, this stuff is not good, it's causing me this, that, and the other thing, why, for goodness sakes, don't the airlines take the damn stuff off the planes?
If their bosses with the airlines had found out that they were talking to the press, they would automatically lose their jobs. As it is, they'd lost their license to fly in some cases. So they would have lost their jobs completely if that had been the case.
Slowly, I started eliminating things from my diet and then got better and better as I started being more aware. And when I did research, I was able to see that aspartame kept coming up with MS. It's very interesting. Very recently, there was a paper by Dr. Russell Blaylock linking aspartame with MS.
Basically, what we see with multiple sclerosis, what was known for a long time, is that it was an autoimmune disease. That is, your body's immune system is attacking your central nervous system, and it strips off the insulation of the nerve fiber called myelin. And that was the basis of multiple sclerosis. And this sort of was a periodic thing. Every so often the nervous system would be attacked by the immune system. What they've discovered recently is that the cell that makes that insulation, called the oligodendrocyte, has glutamate receptors on it. So that when you expose that cell to glutamate, it destroys the cell and prevents the myelin from being formed. That's why it makes the MS much worse and can bring on MS in people who have very mild disease or just have the potential of developing the disease.
One of the areas that Mike Ruff and I have been excited about working in is the interface between the brain and the immune system, because we now know that the immune system actually literally becomes the brain. And new research pioneered by Eva Mezey, M-E-Z-E-Y, at the NIH, shows us that stem cells in our bone marrow pass from our bone marrow into our blood, and some of them ultimately actually become neurons. Lots of them, not 1 or 2, but thousands of them, millions of them. So there's way more action, way more cells passing in and out of the brain. So, this idea that we're protected by the blood-brain barrier is really not true. We've just got anything we eat or put on our body can be carried by a cell from anywhere in the body into our brain.
So if you have hereditary risk of MS, but you don't have the disease, you may never get the disease. We know that there's about 10% of people out there who have findings of MS on autopsy but never developed the disease. We call it silent MS. But if that person with silent MS is consuming food with MSG and it starts killing off their oligodendrocytes, then they're going to develop full-blown MS. So this may explain why we're suddenly seeing all of these cases of MS starting to appear.
because people are consuming aspartame and MSG in huge amounts. And it's flowing right to where this lesion is. Now, when you develop an MS lesion, there's no blood-brain barrier. It's wide open to anything that's in your blood. Now, the MS Society doesn't mention it. We've told them.
How did you find out, or how did you meet other people with MS through the MS Society, or?
No, I'm actually a part of a large church, the International Church of Christ. It's all over the world, and I've lived all over the United States working for this church. I also worked for a nonprofit organization called Hope Worldwide, and so I've traveled all over the world, and I've, with Hope, taking young people just on different third world projects, and so I just have met a lot of people all over the place. So that's how I've actually come in contact with a lot of these women that all around the same time, within about a 4-year time span, have been diagnosed with MS.
About January of 2002, I began having numbness in my right foot. Various things happened. I didn't think much of it. I thought I had bad shoes. But then it kept persisting, and then in February I had vision loss. I would have intermittent vision loss where I would have spots, and then I would lose my right field of vision. I thought it was a one-off at first, but it happened several times. In about June of 2002, I went to my primary care doctor, and he did a neuro exam and was very concerned. Ordered an MRI and told me that I had MS.
Well, I was diagnosed 3 years ago on September 11th when the World Trade Center was falling down. Everything was crazy. I was in Washington, D.C., but I had gone blind in my right eye by that day. It was a progression for probably 10 days at that point. And it was kind of like a shade was coming down on my eye.
Anyways, this friend came up and said, "Do you realize Diet Coke can do this?" And I laughed and I said, "I don't believe you, but I have nothing to lose but a chemo treatment, so I won't drink another diet soda for 1 year." I said, I'll throw this one away and that's it. I won't drink another one. I was supposed to begin my treatment in September. It would have been September of 2003. I went back to my neurologist and was doing significantly better. My eyes were dramatically improved. I hadn't lost my vision. My numbness had begun on my left side at that point and was numb up to my left knee, which never progressed again since the day I stopped drinking it. And of course, neurologist asked me, he said, "Did you start your treatment? Is that why you're doing better?" I said, "No, I didn't start my treatment, but I stopped drinking Diet Coke." He said, "Well, the only way you can prove that to be the cure for you is to go back on it," which at that point I said, "No way. I'm finally feeling better after a couple of years of feeling terrible."
Meanwhile, my sister started having a lot of symptoms, numbness, tingling, a lot of different things, and she started to be followed, and her doctors were trying to diagnose what was wrong with her. So she was diagnosed with MS, and we thought it was odd. I'm adopted, so she's my biological sister, but we're half sisters because we have the same mother but different fathers. And so we just started talking about several people we knew as well, women in their 30s, were being diagnosed with MS. And so to me, I started looking into it thinking, there's got to be some kind of connection. There were, just a lot of different people popping up one by one with the same symptoms, the same thing. So she somehow found out and heard about Betty's work with, the aspartame, and she started reading and looking into it and thinking, and so she decided she didn't know if she even believed that that was a problem or not.
So then in May of 2004, I called them and I said, "If you'll believe that this is the cause, then I will go back on it. If you'll really take it seriously with people."
It's going to be hard.
So in May of 2004, I talked to him. He gave me very specific directions on what I needed to do. He said, I want you at the same time every day to drink 1 diet soda and keep a journal of exactly what is happening.
What happened after the first one?
Well, the first one, it says, I drank it at 11 o'clock, May 6th. I drank 1 Diet Coke. I became extremely thirsty, became nauseous and shaky. I had a headache and my neck ached, which I had totally forgotten that was a problem that I'd had till it came back. And the symptoms lasted until 5:20 that day, so about 6.5 hours. Then the second day, I again drank it at 11 o'clock.
So you had a second day after going through that.
I did it for 4 days, I believe, I did it for 4 days. And all the symptoms continued. By Monday morning, I had to stay in bed. I couldn't get up. And so I absolutely wouldn't. Sunday hives came back, which I hadn't had at all. But by Monday, I called and said, I can't do any more. I've done 4 days, 4 sodas only. I felt so awful, and all of the same fatigue. I slept 2.5 hours in the morning. After I got up, I went back to bed. I went to bed at 9 o'clock that night. I just, I couldn't function again.
How long was the experiment supposed to last?
They didn't say. I didn't, they said just let's start, let's do it this way. And I called them when I was starting, but I did call on Monday and I said, okay, this experiment's over. I'm done. I'm done. I've proven it. I know what happens. I'm finished.
She really didn't talk to me a lot about it until about 6 weeks ago, and she came here for a visit. So then we sat down and I was asking her about her symptoms, what her latest diagnosis was from her doctor, trying to get going here myself with my own doctor and everything, and comparing symptoms. So that's when she started telling me about what she was doing. And she told me about how her doctor wouldn't document everything unless she went back on it. And when she told me, she named off her 21 symptoms, which a lot of the symptoms are the same symptoms that I have. It's a lot of the same MS symptoms. And she said that for 4 days she went back on aspartame, and really it was one drink a day for 4 days, and all 21 symptoms came back. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I mean, I have been drinking away.
She went off of it. It was probably only a month ago now. And I know you've spoken with her with her improvements, but she was going to start her interferon treatments, and I said, please, before you start or before you do anything, just don't start the treatment and just stop drinking or having any aspartame and see what happens first.
I know how I feel. I know that I feel a lot better, and I know that just doing this, apart from anything holistic that I'm doing, it's separate. So I know it's the one thing, that I'm doing that I've changed, instead of changing everything at the same time and not knowing exactly what it is that's affecting me positively.
Anyway, it's abundantly clear that the root causes of most cancers are probably due to, like toxins that have gotten into the food supply and what we eat and what we drink. The argument is, well, we're living longer, and if you live longer, you're going to tend to have more cancers just because the organism is living longer. I'm not aware that explains all of it, and that there is an epidemiology that says cancer rates are increasing, certainly for some cancers compared to others. And we know cancers like lung cancer are strongly correlated with toxins and chemicals and smoke and things like this.
I had no clue about aspartame. I've never drunk diet sodas. I've never used NutraSweet. I've never used any of those products that contain it. And so I became aware by a good friend, Spice Williams Crosby, who is brilliant. And once I saw it, my mouth is still dropping. And my thoughts are first shock and second heartbreak, because I've seen Sweet Misery, which is phenomenal. I've read the articles that Spice has brought me, and frankly, it's very, very shocking. And she wrote an article on a dear friend of mine named Cecil Peoples, who's a great martial artist, who got brain cancer. Found out he was drinking diet sodas a lot.
One day we were having this big event at the dojo, a smoker where all the fighters come in, and it's kind of a fun free-for-all. And I looked down and I saw he's drinking a diet soda, and I'm like, ah!
Spice is in your face, what? Why are you doing that? Oh my God!
you gotta, okay, and I cut it out, cold turkey, right away. So did my wife, so did my kids, so did my friends. I was on my way to a fight at Hollywood Park, and he called me, and he said, "We've got the results back of your MRI." And he said, "I said, oh, how is it?" And he said, "Well, he said you have a tumor on your brain," and he said, I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, what are you gonna do? You gonna give me a shot or something?" He said, "The tumor is benign. It's about 9 millimeters." And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "You gonna give me a shot?" He goes, "Well, no. As far as I know, there's no shot." So I'm driving, and I'm almost to Manchester. And then he said, I said, "Well, what are you gonna do?" He goes, "Well, as far as I know, all you gotta do is have surgery." So I'm thinking, "Oh, okay," and then, like surgery on my brain, and I'm driving. Then all of a sudden it dawned on me, wait a minute, that's brain surgery. You're talking about brain surgery here. And it shook me so much I had to pull off the freeway. I was like, whoa, Dr. Johnson, you talking about brain, I gotta have brain surgery. And he goes, yeah,
You would think that if a man cuts a tumor out of another man's head that didn't have any history of brain tumors, that they would somehow say, you know what, don't drink any diet soda, don't take any aspartame. And, but that has to come into their awareness.
If you don't say get off me, they're gonna do 50 push-ups. Let's go. I have a lot of influence over a lot of people. And I tell them what happened to me, and they stop. They trust me. They don't question. It's like I trusted my surgeon. And they trust me, and I tell them. And the kids don't even offer. They don't even ask anymore. Because the first they were, how come you can't have a Diet Pepsi? So I said, well, son, it's not good for you, baby. It's not good for you. And then I said, that's what made Daddy sick. I'm pretty sure that's what made Daddy sick. That was enough for them. So anyone that I know that I'm in contact with won't do it. At least not around me, anyway.
Once my endocrinologist, diagnosed me with Graves' disease, I became really, really skeptical. Mostly due to the fact that, the typical Graves patient is a middle-aged woman. And being an elite athlete male at 25 years old with no family history, I just didn't fit the stereotype. So I really maybe start questioning this diagnosis. I was looking, like I said, I had 6 months till go time. I couldn't leave a stone unturned. And I really started, I went to the library, read up on hyperthyroidism, figured out anything and everything to do with that. I spent hours, I wouldn't sleep because I couldn't practice anyway. I'd stay up all night and all day, glued to that, to my computer, researching. I eventually came up on Dr. Janet Starr Hull's website, Sweet Poison. And, a bell went off. Her symptoms, her case history was identical to mine. And I called her up that evening, and we kind of took it from there.
Jan Smith, an instructor at North Texas, believes a reaction to NutraSweet caused her to be put into the hospital.
I was hospitalized. I was told that I would die if I didn't have my thyroid removed. And before I let them do any surgery or any radiation on me, I wanted to find out what made me ill.
Justin and I both could kick ourselves for even using the stuff in the first place. Neither one of us had a weight problem when we got started. Justin is an Olympian, and he's got 2% body fat. Why did he drink Diet Colas? You look back at it and you think, how did I fall into that trap?
When you're an athlete that's concerned about your body, diving's, you're out there in a pair of Speedos, doesn't cover much. It's a very aesthetic sport. So, I was by far in the best shape of my life, and I was definitely in the best shape of any U.S. diver. Anybody will tell you that. And so I was very conscious of what, I thought it wasn't a problem. I started drinking diet soda back in high school.
But for the most part, athletes, their bodies stay at such a high metabolic rate that anything that they eat or drink is going to be processed fairly rapidly, and their bodies are going to be much more sensitive to chemicals.
It's unbelievable what that stuff is in. It's in protein powder. I was drinking the protein bars that I was eating in between practice. the equal I used in my sweet tea, anything. I mean, I went through my kitchen and went through each cupboard and the refrigerator and threw out everything. It's in yogurt, and that was the only change I made. I mean, I didn't tell my doctor that I was off my medicine until about 3 or 4 months later, because I wanted to have a series of blood tests come back normal, to show her, I'm like, listen, I have not been taking the medicine. I've not changed anything other than my diet and taken a multivitamin, and I'm totally fine.
How did she react?
At that point, she was well, whatever gets you there. I mean, she was a bit skeptical at first, and I still don't think she's. I mean, I showed her the book that Dr. Hull had given me, and kind of explained where I was coming from, and actually I left the book with her, and I think she read it. I don't know if she actually bought it. She didn't seem to say much the next time I went in for my last confirmation blood test.
Now, the baby is particularly at risk. As we said, the brain is growing the fastest during the last trimester of pregnancy and the first 2 years after birth. It's what we call the brain growth spurt period. During that time, all these synaptic connections are taking place. There's about 100 billion neurons in the brain. There's over 100 trillion connections. Some think as many as 600 trillion. So there's a lot of connecting processes going on in that brain all the way to age 2. Now, at age 4, only 80% of the brain is finished forming. At age 8, only 90%. And even in the teenage years, the prefrontal lobes are still forming. And that's why you teenagers act up. It's because the frontal lobe, which controls your emotions and your reactions, is not myelinated. It's not finished yet. And that's why it's important to control them until then. But what this high vulnerability is what we're doing in this society. And recently, the aspartame people, I forgot what the name of Betty Martini will know, but there's a group out of Florida who said in an announcement over the radio and the newspaper, NutraSweet is perfectly safe and pregnant women should be drinking it.
So tell me the story about what happened with Katrina.
Let's see. She was like 2 years and 9 months old when her little sister was born. And we went to the drugstore and got, the little iron drops that you have to give the infant. And I thought at the time that, it'd be good for her, Katrina, also to have some kind of vitamins or something. And she had tried some at a friend's house, these, I don't know if it's okay to say the name, but Flintstones. And she liked them, so I thought, well, I'll just get her some of those. And came home and started giving her those. And also at the time I was trying to lose weight, so I was eating a lot of things that had aspartame in them, like Dannon yogurt was the main thing. It was horrible, but she was in ICU for a month. And it was a couple of weeks before we knew if she was going to live or not. They had to put her into a coma.
Put her into a coma?
Right, to stop the seizing because it was constant. And they said if it continues, she'll die. I told the story to, and this person said, wow, that really sounds like a reaction to aspartame, or aspartame poisoning is what she had said. And she had just gone to a seminar or something where they discussed aspartame. And so she put me in touch with this lady that was in charge of an organization here in Dallas that was making people more aware and trying to gather people that had also had reactions to it. Her daughter had had one, and that was what sparked her interest in it. And through that, we did an interview, and that's when I met Dr. Hall, Janet Hall. And it was really interesting, hearing her story. And as
all of a sudden you felt not so alone anymore.
Yeah, and I got more and more information. I'm going, yeah, she had that response. She had that symptom. She did this, and all these things were starting to make sense. And so I had gone home and I cleared my house of everything that had aspartame or NutraSweet in the ingredient list. And but one thing I didn't get rid of was the Flintstone vitamins that I felt, were so important to her. And so as she had gotten better, and this was about probably September or so, it was about 9 months later, I gave them to her again. And out of the blue, she started complaining of these stomach aches and headaches and dizziness, and her speech was starting to slur. All of these things that I had recalled, because I had to tell the doctors what I'd seen and what had happened before. But so I realized it was all happening again. Anyway, I started going through my cupboards, everything, to find out what it could be and reading ingredient lists.
Mm-hmm.
And I found aspartame on those Flintstone vitamins. And I was just shocked because I never would have thought that they would put an artificial sweetener, something like that, in a child's food product. And especially, vitamins that are supposed to be healthy for you. And so I was very angry, but anyway, I got rid of them, quit giving them to her, and the symptoms stopped immediately. As a result of her injury to her brain, she has suffered damage to the different lobes, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and parietal lobe, and those areas control, auditory processing, short-term memory, behavioral control, and she has some visual problems that we've just found out about that we're having to deal with.
I'm an aspartame survivor too, by the way.
And so,
do you take a look at package labels and stuff?
Yeah.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Does it
I
ever
didn't
get
know.
frustrating to you, or how does it feel to have to constantly look at the back of packages?
Kind of confusing.
Confusing?
Yeah.
Is it hard to see the ingredient list sometimes?
Yes.
Because they have such small lettering.
And she still struggles with reading too.
I'm getting better.
Yes, you are, but she reads at a first, second grade level. But we work on that.
With all of the problems aspartame has had, you think they would have taken it off the market? They haven't. But I will tell you this, if aspartame was ephedra, ephedra's gone. Aspartame was tryptophan, one death, one problem, one accusation, one allegation, tryptophan is gone. If you did that with vitamin C, tomorrow vitamin C would be gone. But for the poisons and toxins developed by the pharmaceutical cartel or from the chemical manufacturing food plants, the FDA will not move on it.
I think that's criminal that in our country we treat our populace that way, subjecting them to the hazards and the harm of those artificial sweeteners when we have a God-made natural product that is so wonderful.
There are some traditional teas in South America made 100% with the stevia leaves. In Brazil and Argentina, Paraguay, there's if you go to some said area there where stevia grows wild, there is a traditional tea called chimarrão that they make with the ground leaves, and then if they put hot water on it, and then they sip this all day long.
Stevia is basically a plant. Stevia side is the crystal that's in the leaf of the little plant, and it's extracted and processed and refined and packaged like this. The leaf itself, if you were to taste it, is extremely sweet. Indians in Brazil, before Brazil was discovered, were known to use stevia to sweeten their medications or drinks, or just walking along in the woods, they would strip the leaves off the plant and chew them just because they tasted good. They were so sweet. It's like eating candy. I want you to taste this. Whoop. That's the stevia leaf ground up. And they grind it with the stems and everything. Put that in your mouth.
Wow.
Doesn't that taste good? It's a sweet herb.
How did you first find out about stevia?
Stevia. How did I find out about it? Well, I guess it was Betty Martini turned me onto it. And I tried all different kinds. And the one I like is the one in Garland, Texas, this one here. Stevita, that's the one I use. And it's really nice because it comes in little packets and you can give them out to people. People have never heard of these things. They don't, I don't think you can advertise it as a sweetener. It's a food supplement. And they have these little things here, which I carry around with me all the time. And you can give them out, and people say, oh, boy, that's great. I'll put one of those. I said, don't put one in your coffee unless you taste it, because I find that half of one does me for a cup of coffee, because it's very sweet. It's 500 times sweeter than sugar. And it has no saccharin, aspartame, fructose, sugar, FOS, whatever that is, maltodextrin, or artificial sweeteners.
There's a huge market out there for artificial sweeteners, unfortunately, because sweeteners such as stevia, a natural plant-based sweetener that have no calories and no toxic effects whatsoever, our beloved FDA, which on the radio I call the Freedom Disallowed Association, doesn't allow to make a claim for its use as a sweetener. It's a dietary supplement, but nobody knows what it's for. We don't want to tell people what it could be used for. That could be dangerous. Dangerous to who? The companies that sell the artificial sweeteners, perhaps even the sugar companies.
Stevia was not passed by the FDA. Stevia is still considered to be not shown to be safe by the FDA. And it is remarkable because stevia has two very sketchy studies that suggest maybe there's a problem. And the researchers that did these studies back in the 1960s say that they do not really, never did think that these showed problems. And there are dozens and dozens of studies that have been done that actually do demonstrate the safety of stevia. But there was what is called an industry complaint against stevia. That's one way that the FDA initiates action. Somebody in the industry calls up and says, we think so-and-so is doing something bad. Then the FDA goes and investigates and takes action. So an industry complaint was filed against stevia. And by the way, we don't know who filed it because that's secret. We've tried to get it in all kinds of different ways, but it's secret. But there were many companies that were going towards stevia. Lipton, for example, was going to use stevia. Some of the other tea companies and so on all stopped dead in their tracks when this complaint came in. It is now, once the dietary supplement bill passed, it was able to be used as a dietary supplement. So there's one company out there that says, don't sweeten your tea, supplement it.
I was selling this book, I started selling this book actually in 1996, these tea books, just to give some more information to the consumer, how to use stevia, what it is, a little bit of history of stevia, etc. And some of the studies, safety studies on stevia. And beginning in January 1998, the FDA made an inspection of my facilities here, and they found out that I was selling the books with the stevia. Also, they went to our internet webpage, and they found out that I was selling the books. Now, my primary purpose selling the books was for information, to educate the consumer. Of course, I could always make some money also, profit by selling the books.
Never anywhere in the world one medically proven problem of health due to the use of stevia. You can't say that for those artificial sweeteners. You just can't say that. Some have been taken off the market because they lead to cancer, they do this, they do that. And the FDA puts the brakes on and won't allow this.
Beginning in January 1998, after the FDA inspector inspected our facilities and found out that they are selling the books, they kept putting pressure on us to stop selling the book. Their argument was that the book, because the book teaches the consumer how to use stevia in a form other than as a dietary supplement, that actually you can cook with it, that you can use it as a sweetener. And stevia has not been approved for that purpose. Therefore, they felt that by selling the stevia cookbook and the other literature, actually the books were adulterating the stevia products that I was selling. Therefore, I would not be able to sell the cookbooks.
And we were working on several university laboratories developing products that could be done with stevia. I have a list of 13 products in which it could be used wonderfully, all the way from yogurt to chewing gum to toothpaste to food products of different sorts.
According to the attorney advice, that we were allowed to sell the book, that we could continue, we had a right to sell the book. But beginning from about February, March 1998, the FDA inspectors started embargoing our products being imported from Brazil at the airport. So in other words, they were putting pressure on us for us to stop selling the book and or we'll not have the product to sell.
Well, I'll buy a couple of barrels of this stuff then.
And just lock it up in your
Lock it up, yeah, and then sell it. You want some hot stevia? Hey, man, this is real stuff. Before it was outlawed, how about that? Here, have a little pack of stevia. That'll be $200 for this, right?
My daughter was here when I received the fax that were coming here to witness the destruction. So she immediately called the media, say, look, we're going to have to burn some books here. My father has to burn some books. So they were here about 2 p.m. They were here. The media was here, and that's what happens. That the next morning there were some articles on the local newspaper about the issue that an art company, Stevita company, was having with the FDA. The FDA ordering the burning of the books, and that caused a lot of interest among the media. So I started receiving calls here at 7 o'clock in the morning, the next morning. Say, if some people, well, they're kind of, joking about, hey, if you're going to burn books, let me know, because I like to go there. Hey, what's this? What's that? Gestapo burning books? I said, well, I cannot burn today either. I don't have the permit from the city to burn the books. I was very afraid. You see, when you see a very small company, small business, and some officials from the government coming here with all their credentials, etc. I mean, they could really shut us down immediately.
One of the things that political scientists say quite frequently is that very shortly after a regulatory agency is created, it gets captured by those that it regulates. That's kind of people say that repeatedly, and I think they're totally wrong. I believe they're born captured. They do not come into existence until the industry needs them.
As long as I say here is a dietary supplement, is okay for you. But if says here sweetener, is not be okay for you.
But it's the same product.
It's the same product, okay? Now the contradiction is a paradox, right? So it's like, and then the fact that they say if I sell a cookbook that says stevia is a sweetener, and then I sell a product that's labeled dietary supplement, the same one, that the cookbook is going to adulterate the product here.
That cookbook looks like it could fit in this bottle.
Right, yeah, and adulterate the bottle, yes. It doesn't make sense.
Maybe you know a millionaire, or maybe one will view this presentation that'll say, I want to help work with this man to do that laboratory research, and we're going to put this through the FDA, and we'll back it with the money that company was going to do. They had $10 million worth of contracts signed for laboratory research alone.
It sounds like they were almost there.
And went bankrupt because of somebody getting greedy and taking investors' money and disappearing with it. I told the owner of the company, I said, you were going to spend $10 million of research, and you were going to make $10 million a month on selling the product. And you settled for a whole lot less out of greed. That's just a crying shame. It's your loss and the nation's loss. And of course, I lost everything because I had invested in the company, believing in the product.
There's a misrepresentation. A lot of people think that the FDA does all sorts of research studies to determine whether a drug does what it's supposed to do and isn't harmful. The FDA doesn't do studies. They accept the studies from the drug manufacturer, which again is normally conflict of interest because the drug manufacturer is not going to give you the studies that show that the drug hurt a lot of people, it doesn't work. And that's actually come out in the press, where a lot of studies were done on certain drugs that showed the placebo worked better. And they just kept on doing studies until they managed to get a couple that showed that the drug worked better, and those were the ones that the FDA got to look at. But once a drug has been approved by them, which doesn't mean that it does what it's supposed to or that it's harmless, it just means that there was enough information that they were willing to basically sign off on it and say, okay. And we know it doesn't mean that because of the ones that get taken off the market later after they kill enough people.
How did the FDA treat MSG?
It treated MSG very peculiarly. They had a lot of evidence that MSG was a problem from its staff. The Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, held hearings on baby food, and I highlighted the problems with MSG, including the studies that had been generated, or the research that had been generated by the FDA scientists. But the commissioner of the FDA came forward and said he did not think it was causing any problems.
Dr. John Olney was a neuroscientist who was actually the discoverer of the process of excitotoxicity that occurs in the brain. And this basically, just to give you an introduction, is what happens is when you feed certain types of amino acids, acidic amino acids, to animals or humans, certain of the nerve cells in their brain become so excited these nerve cells will die. And he named this excitotoxicity. So he was the discoverer of the process and the lead researcher from that time till present. And what he discovered was that the aspartic acid in aspartame, that third component, was an excitotoxin that was just as powerful as the original excitotoxin he discovered, L-glutamic acid.
But right in the middle of that set of exchanges, the senior nutritionist from Heinz Baby Food quit and went public with an argument that MSG harms babies. So that created a political situation in which the companies needed to act in some way to quell the unrest that was being created by this debate.
Glutamic acid is present in every protein. It's present in the protein of all the grains and cereals and of the proteins of meat. It's present in milk. It's present in human breast milk. But this doesn't mean that glutamic acid or its salt, which, by the way, exists in the intestinal tract as a product of digestion of these proteins, it doesn't mean that these are toxic. Certainly not by the oral route.
Dr. Ozer claims, Dr. Olney, that human beings produce MSG during digestion far more than they receive in foods.
Yeah, that's a very good point to make, because it is true that there is some glutamate naturally contained in the proteins of our foods. But that protein has to be digested before the glutamate can be released into the system. And that takes quite a period of time. And so from that naturally occurring glutamate, you don't get very high blood levels of glutamate. But if you isolate the glutamate from the protein first as a chemical and then put it into the food, it's released immediately into the circulation and doesn't have to be digested first. That causes high peaks of glutamate, and it's that which I believe causes the brain damage in infant animals.
Dr. Olney and I were working in 1970, and had been for a couple of years, on getting MSG out of baby food, which we were successful in doing. The companies took it out after a lot of publicity and some Senate hearings, because MSG caused brain lesions in monkeys, and that suggested that it could be responsible for some of the 95% of mental retardation that doesn't have any known cause. Also, Jean Mayer, who was the nutrition advisor to President Nixon, also felt that MSG in baby food was dangerous. All that politics came together, and they took it out of baby food voluntarily. But there was one other aspect to the issue that I think had to be present for them to act, and that was that they took the MSG out of the food, the baby food, but then they put in textured vegetable protein, which is exactly the same in its effect as MSG.
The government has created a clandestine way of reporting MSG that most people are unaware of, such as natural flavoring, which you might very well read on a package in a health food store, is MSG, texturized vegetable protein. Very unhealthy. Need to stay away from it.
The word natural only means it came from nature. It's to imply that it's healthy because it's natural. It means nothing on a food label. And some years ago, Congress, apparently through lobbyists, passed an act in which flavors and flavorings were to be considered proprietary items. And therefore, if you call a company or a flavoring house to ask what is in their flavor or flavoring, that they will tell you that we can't disclose that.
If, for instance, you eat a food and you feel that you have clouded consciousness, it's difficulty to think, you feel like you're in a gray cloud, you can't put your sentences together, have difficulty coming up with different components of your sentence. All of these things indicate that you're having difficulty logically thinking, and that's a very early sign or sensitive sign for MSG toxicity or aspartame toxicity. Some people have much worse reactions. Some people have cardiac arrest. Some people have all sorts of neurological problems, numbness, blindness, difficulty seeing, double vision. All these things can indicate sensitivity to these components.
And then I must also say that it appears that once you're sensitized, that indeed you then become a reactor.
There's a concept known as the full barrel effect, where we each have a limited amount of reserve to compensate for the assaults that we have in the environment. So NutraSweet or aspartame and sugar, a whole variety of other things kind of use up that reserve. And at some point you get to the top of the barrel, and one little thing will just cause you to have reactions and symptoms. So it's a matter of avoiding the poisons, and MSG and aspartame are not good for anyone. They are not good for humans. If you're human, you should avoid these things. So just because you can consume it and not have side effects doesn't mean it's a good thing for you.
When I discovered that MSG was actually addictive and caused cravings, and it bypasses the apostat, that's part of the brain that tells us when we're full. So you can't eat an entire bag of Doritos without blinking an eye, which I've done. And it causes you to become obese because it is literally given to lab mice and rats to cause obesity so they can study diet. Well, I was furious when I first heard that, and then I became happy because I thought, well then, you know what? It's not me then. This is not about self-control or self-discipline. This is something that's being added into our food specifically to make us buy more of their product.
If you look carefully at how allergens work in the body and chemicals, these chemical toxins we've been talking about, everything from our aspartame and MSG, to the extent that these agents attack, if you will, the body in topological layers. It starts with skin and mucous membrane problems. So fine, we have some rashes, a little bit of drooling, runny bowels, whatever. The types of symptoms we associate with children's diseases, the skin and mucous membrane ones. But then essentially as the enemy advances into our body, you then start seeing deeper symptoms in deeper tissues, muscles, joints, connective tissue. And then as we become older, typically by about middle age, you start seeing the problems of hormonal imbalance, the internal organs start manifesting symptoms. And then ultimately, by advanced age, you start seeing the central nervous system and spinal cord problems, your Alzheimer's and your Parkinson's and the neurologic diseases.
So let's just have a quick review of what MSG and the excitotoxins do. Well, they are associated with neurodegenerative diseases. They're associated with neurodevelopmental abnormalities, nervous system injury. Anytime your brain's injured, it produces it. Endocrine disorders, diabetes type 1 and 2, syndrome X, gross obesity, enhanced cancer growth and spread, immune dysfunction, retinal disorders, arteriosclerosis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, and other autoimmune disorders, GI disorders, and sudden cardiac death. I'd put more on there, but I didn't have room.
We're making these conditions advance a lot faster, we're making them a lot more severe, and we're taking cases that would never actually have developed into multiple sclerosis
and we're throwing them into full-blown disease. Same thing with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. Even though the food additives were not the original cause of the disorder.
Dr. George R. Schwartz from Santa Fe, New Mexico, wrote a book entitled In Bad Taste, the MSG Syndrome. And for the first time in print that I'm aware of, he disclosed the problems with monosodium glutamate, but more importantly, he pointed out that there were hidden sources of MSG, that it was contained in other food ingredients. And that basically saved my life.
Mr. Samuels became an investment banker, providing investment banking services to the healthcare industry. He has been retired since 1995 because he found it impossible to avoid MSG while traveling, which we all know the challenges of that. Mr. Samuels has actually lost consciousness on over 30 occasions from MSG and is personally well versed in the dangers of this toxin in our food that is everywhere in our food supply. Mr. Samuels is also founder and president of the Truth in Labeling campaign. With that, I would like to introduce Mr. Samuels.
In the early 1990s, a committee from the FDA and USDA, a joint committee, came to Chicago to hold a public hearing on the Food Labeling Act of 1990, which has resulted in the box on food labels where they list calories and protein, etc. And they were getting public comment, and my wife happened to read the paper the day or two before the meeting and noticed that they were having the meeting. And she said, you have to call them and see if they know about MSG. And they said, we are not discussing MSG, but we would love to have someone discuss it. In fact, the woman said, I have a neighbor who gets critically ill from it, and I would really appreciate it if you would present the problem. I don't think she would ever admit that again, and probably she's retired at this point, but that's what I was told. And she said, would you please come? George Schwartz and I left the meeting thinking the problem's resolved, that they were going to label MSG whenever it appeared in food. However, we heard through sources that the glutamate industry had been made aware of the meeting. And 2 weeks later, they met with the same people. And then the fun began, because in fact we were unable to get minutes of the meeting, but fortunately I had written out minutes of the meeting as soon as I left the room and had taken notes, during the meeting. And I kept pushing for minutes. Finally got them in, I think it was about 6 months, and it was the best Hollywood production that I've ever seen, because it had nothing to do with what went on at our meeting. From that point forward, the FDA has fought us on the MSG issue.
Every 10 years, they double the amount of MSG that's put in food. That's not even counting the aspartame. So we're consuming enormous amounts of these substances in a variety of foods. We're magnesium deficient, which makes you infinitely more susceptible, and we're exposed to all kinds of metals like aluminum and mercury, which paralyzes your ability of your mitochondria to produce energy, and that magnifies excitotoxicity enormously.
We all know to avoid monosodium glutamate, excuse me, but there are other things. I could really spin them off, but so that I don't miss anything, I'll refer you to our website, but monopotassium glutamate is in some products. Yeast extract is always an MSG product. Hydrolyzed protein, you've seen hydrolyzed soy protein, you've seen hydrolyzed corn protein, hydrolyzed pea protein.
Plant protein extract, sodium caseinate, yeast extract, hydrolyzed oat flour, corn oil, autolyzed yeast. So, I mean, if you look at the back of a food, you're going to see this is just about in every single thing you're going to pick up that has a shelf life, correct?
I go into a supermarket nowadays and I feel safe getting about 2 to 5 products.
Yeah, what's left to eat now? I mean, realistically, what are we supposed to eat?
What the committee has heard today, in all its complexity, seems to me to boil down to a single proposition. The FDA is simply wrong, not once but repeatedly, when it has affirmed and reaffirmed and reaffirmed the safety of aspartame. Now, of course, anyone is entitled to disagree with a government agency. But it's critically important to note that on this subject, the FDA does not stand alone. In attacking the FDA, those who attack the safety of aspartame are also attacking the independent determinations of the health and regulatory authorities of the world.
I'm curious to watch, for example, Monsanto. You might want to just go look at the way Monsanto's gone over the last 6 or 8 years, because Monsanto bought cereal because it had NutraSweet, and the president of the NutraSweet subdivision of cereal became the president of Monsanto. And he was a lawyer, and he had been involved in the process that had manipulated FDA to let NutraSweet on the market. And he used the same techniques to get genetically engineered food on the market. And interestingly enough, when they tried to move that approval into Europe, they ran into a firestorm of public disapproval.
So studies show that the more people learn about genetically modified foods, the less they trust them. So over there, for example, they learned about Arpad Pusztai, one of the leading scientists in the world, who went public with his concerns about genetically modified foods based on experiments he conducted. He was fired from his job after 35 years and silenced with threats of a lawsuit. Everyone over there knows the story. Very few people here do. So based on the increased awareness of the potential dangers, the people in the UK said, we don't want to eat them. So subsequently, in April 1999, Unilever, Britain's largest food manufacturer, committed to take all GM ingredients out of their European brands. Now, this created a landslide. Within 1 week, every major food manufacturer followed suit. McDonald's, Burger King, Nestle's, Safeway, for their European brands. That's because the European consumers had expressed concern. However, they were still feeding the American consumers genetically modified ingredients. Because in the United States, very few people even know what a genetically modified food is. More than 50% of people surveyed say they've never eaten a genetically modified food in their lives, even though most eat it in every meal.
Ultimately, the president of Monsanto, who had brought us NutraSweet, was on a transatlantic call talking to environmentalists from the U.S. and Britain and Europe, apologizing for having been insensitive in the pushing of genetically engineered foods down the throats of Europeans. But the backlash onto the Monsanto company was enormous, and they had to go through major reorganizations. There was still the underlying low infection of the NutraSweet problem going on. They ultimately sold NutraSweet to 2 different buyers, and they've systematically had to backtrack from this high-handed method that they've used to try to cause people to be forced by law to buy their products.
When you genetically modify food, you take a gene from one species, like a virus, bacteria, plant, animal, or human, take it out of the DNA, and artificially put it into the DNA of another species. So you take a trait from one species and you put it into another species. Now that gene may never naturally be able to be part of that DNA, and you carry with it a lot of other genetic material. The process itself can cause damage to the DNA, it can cause changes in the levels of expression, and many other problems that actually have just now been discovered.
I found it, if I may use a neutral term such as interesting, that they were able in the Orient to introduce into rice an amino acid sequence that causes miscarriage, and we're hoping to be able to use this as a method of family planning. dramatic things can be done with our foods, I think it would behoove us to look into that further before we race into this new technology headlong.
Scientists trying to prove that genetically modified bovine growth hormone was safe ended up injecting only 3 cows for the study. They used a different company's RBGH, one that wasn't ever approved. They used a daily dose instead of a much larger bi-weekly dose. They pasteurized the milk 120 times longer. Then they added artificially powdered hormone to the milk to try and get it to be reduced even further. In Monsanto's big published animal feeding study on genetically modified soy, they used mature animals instead of young ones. They diluted their soy 10 to 1 or 12 to 1 before feeding the animals. They never weighed the organs. They left out some of the most incriminating evidence, which was later found and made public. In another study, they asked the laboratory to use an obsolete method of detection, according to the laboratory. Another company overheated their corn products 4.5 times before trying to detect whether the protein had survived the heat treatment. Monsanto used 1,250 times the amount of digestive enzymes compared to that recommended by the World Health Organization. There's all sorts of ways in which they have apparently rigged the research to show that these foods were safe. And nonetheless, even with all these attempts, they still find that over and over again, animals that have been fed these products show problems, or there's differences in nutritional levels, or the crops themselves have unexplained surprise effects, like being destroyed by sunlight or being blown over by the wind. The most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. Why? Because we don't understand what goes on the level of the DNA.
They are just marching forward with this genetically engineered food idea because it's got the ability to be patented, and anything they think can be patented, they believe they can make huge amounts of money off of, because huge amounts of money are what they're in the business for. And whether or not it will in the long run be a good thing for the food supply and for the food consumer is at best secondary on their list. Probably it's tertiary or even further down their list. And they will push it, and they will push it.
The United States is trying every way they can to push their agenda of spreading genetically engineered foods around the world. They have recently filed a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization against Europe, claiming that their resistance to GM foods is an illegal trade barrier. And if they win this, then they can either impose tariffs or force the opening of those markets. And they can use that same kind of threat now to developing countries, and they have already.
We've noticed corporations under fire go on extensive PR campaigns. Representatives will go on news shows and they'll state definitively that, regardless of evidence, that their product is safe, and yet their statements go unchallenged. Yeah. Why did they get away with this?
Well, that's part of it. Now we're getting into the area of real malfeasance. But that's peculiar to the U.S. system, very peculiar. So, for example, right now there's negotiations going on with Australia over what's called a free trade agreement. Not much to do with free trade, but that's what these things are called. Australia happens to have maybe the most efficient drug distribution system in the world. Costs are a fraction of what they are here for the very same drug produced by the very same company. It apparently works very efficiently. I understand from medical researchers it's the best one they know. Well, the United States is trying to destroy it as part of the free trade agreement, arguing correctly that the Australian system interferes with free trade. The reason it interferes is because it is what is called evidence-based. That is directly to your point. If a pharmaceutical corporation wants to advertise in Australia saying, this drug, which is going to cost 10 times as much as the one you've been taking, is far better and it's going to make you healthy and so on and so forth, they're not allowed to do it unless they provide evidence. Now that's an interference with free trade because it prevents corporations from lying. And lying is part of free trade, so therefore it is an interference.
But they're just every bit as arrogant as they always have been. So you take something like growth hormone in cattle, milk cattle. They have managed to win lawsuits which say that companies that do not use the growth hormone in their milk-producing cattle cannot advertise that fact or put it on their labels. They can't say, we do not use growth-enhancing hormones. That is considered to be illegal. That's how arrogant and pushy these people are.
The position of the U.S. negotiators is you're not allowed to have evidence-based criteria. You just have to allow what they call the market to work. It has absolutely nothing to do with the market. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies are granted enormous protection from market forces. That's what patents are about. And patents under the World Trade Organization agreement go way beyond any regime that ever existed in the past. I mean, no currently developed country would ever have gotten there if there were restrictions like that. So the pharmaceutical corporations are given monopoly pricing rights for a long period, now really extended. They claim that they need it because of their research and development costs, but that's another scam. Most of the research is done in public institutions anyway, or on public funds. By the pharmaceutical company's own figures, they do about 40% of it, I think. And that 40% is misleading because a lot of it is basically marketing.
All of the major powerful institutions in modern life use public relations firms to shape and prepare public opinion to carry out what the founder of the industry, Edward Bernays, aptly described as engineering consent. Because whether it be going to war in Iraq or buying milk that's been produced using genetically engineered hormones, the public has to accept that, and the way to make that happen is they hire a public relations firm, which has expertise in how to mold opinion, how to shape and influence the reporting of topics in the news so that it's favorable to their clients and so forth. His clients were people like the tobacco industry originally. Also, a number of food industry clients, like, for example, the bacon industry hired him to promote sales of bacon. So how did he do that? He set out to generate news stories telling people that they should have a hearty breakfast in the morning of bacon and eggs.
Bacon wasn't a breakfast food.
It wasn't considered much of a breakfast food. So what he did was he recruited a panel of scientists to say that people should eat a hearty breakfast in order to start off their day that would be good for their health and their constitution, and sent this information around to reporters. In the day when Bernays did this, that was considered a rather novel idea.
20 years ago, who would have thought turkey would become such a popular summer food? Even until a few short years ago, most turkeys were sold during the harvest and holiday seasons. Today, 1 out of every 4 turkeys sold is during the summer months, and most of them are used on the barbecue. Brush generously during barbecuing with your favorite sauce. The aroma will bring the neighbors in a hurry, and maybe make some friends you've never met before.
Do you have any idea of how we all of a sudden got bombarded by these television ads of patients being told to ask doctors about new health products?
It was a lobbying campaign by the drug industry, which started 15 years ago, and it was developed and it was presented to FDA as proposed regulations, and the FDA loosened up its regulations and allowed these drug ads to be presented. It also, it's interesting to note that it makes up a major place for revenue for the media that was taken away when cigarettes stopped advertising. It's a huge part of the structure now of the media, the government, and the healthcare system.
The media, especially the news media, should be a public service. At least it seems to me that it should be.
Well, but see, that's not in the United States. In fact, here's another respect in which the U.S. has been somewhat off the spectrum of industrial societies. So take, say, radio. When radio came in the 1920s, almost everywhere it was assumed there would have to be a public service. That is, there would be a national public radio system. How good it is depends on what country it is. So if it's in Russia, it was rotten. If it was BBC, it was pretty good. But somehow or other, it was there. There was a big battle about that in the United States. So the church, colleges, labor unions, a lot of activists wanted something like that. But this is so much a business-run society that it was privatized very quickly, handed over to major corporations, RCA, a couple others. When television came along, it wasn't even a question. It was just a huge public gift to big private corporations, whereas almost everywhere else it was public. Here there is finally in the 60s something called a public system emerged, very small, privately funded anyway, and mainly to relieve the big corporations of the responsibility to have a small public interest sector. They didn't want to bother with that, so they didn't mind if a public system developed and they could say, well, we don't have to do it, somebody else is doing it. But it's very marginal and it's not significant.
Edward Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, and so he grew up steeped in this Freudian language of the subconscious and the superego and the id and all these concepts that Freud had developed to talk about how how the subconscious works and how people are shaped by motivations often of which they themselves are unaware. Now, when Freud was developing all of that, his objective as a therapist was to help people become more aware of their unconscious motives and drives so that they could lead healthier lives. What Bernays did that I think is really remarkable is he almost did the opposite. He said, since people have all these unconscious motivations and drives, the lesson to learn from that is that people are fundamentally irrational and incapable of making sensible decisions by themselves, and therefore you need a special class of professional opinion managers like myself to tell everyone else what to think, because otherwise all these crazy people will be thinking for themselves and you'll have chaos.
I mean, the country was set up, go back to the Constitutional Convention, the 1780s, the idea was that, as James Madison put it, the main framer, that power should be in the hands of the wealth of the nation, the more responsible set of men, those who sympathize with the rights of property owners, and the rest should be fragmented and shouldn't be able to influence policy. That's one way to set up a country. There have been struggles about that for 200 years.
We're developing a society because of all of these different toxins known to affect brain function. We're seeing a society that not only has a lot more people of lower IQ, but a lot fewer people of higher IQ. In other words, a dumbing down, a chemical dumbing down of society. So everyone's sort of mediocre. That leaves them dependent on government because they can't excel. We have these people of lower IQ who are totally dependent. Then we have this mass of people who are going to believe anything they're told because they can't really think clearly. And very few people of very high IQ who have good cognitive function who can figure this all out. And that's what they want. So, you can kind of piece it together as to why they are so insistent in spending so many hundreds of millions of dollars of propaganda money to dumb down society.
Every time you break one thing, it's not that aspartame is the only thing that is dangerous to people. There are thousands of things out there. But if you can break the cycle of that toxicity by pointing out one absurdity, of which aspartame is that, and then the following artificial sweeteners will be as well, then you begin, like in my experience, it's like, wow, if they lied to me about this healing issue by giving me a drug for allergies, which did nothing but suppress it and make it worse, the liver and everything that came with it, what about everything else or anything else? And so it began to have me question everything. So that's what I see happening. And so even if it's one issue, it opens up the floodgates for awareness and perhaps healing on so many other levels.
Medicine can take care of about 20% of what ails us. The rest is largely beyond medical practice at the moment. So until the scientists and MDs come to the perfect cures, we're kind of left to deal with it on our own. and not be at the mercy of this. And so it kind of like takes responsibility and gets us to, well, what can I do to promote my own health and well-being?
If you continuously feed those chemicals to the body, as we do with diet products, for example, the body becomes saturated with those chemicals. And then again, if it absorbs into the brain, you can have brain problems. If it gets into the thyroid gland, you can have thyroid problems, the pancreas, diabetes, these types of disorders. When you detox, it's very important to know the specific toxin that is at the root of the disease. And most traditional medical doctors aren't going to be able to tell you what has caused your disease. But that's a missing link. That's a key. And what I asked my doctor was what caused it. And he said, well, we don't know. So I didn't allow him to permanently destroy my thyroid until I knew what the cause was. I believe that when you can identify to the best of your ability the cause of your headaches, MS, whatever dysfunction the body is showing as a reaction to certain chemicals, once you've identified those and removed those from your life, 9 out of 10 times you're going to heal.
The one thing that I like to do is ask them certain questions when my clients come to me. Yes, do you smoke? Do you do alcohol? Do you do drugs? Recreational drugs? Medicinal drugs? Now let's discuss the drugs that you do, the steroids. Oh, I don't do any steroids. Do you do dairy? Yes, you're doing drugs. What do you mean? Well, there's recombinant bovine growth hormone shot into every cow. That's known as Posilac. You can thank Monsanto for that. Which we know the cow who's only supposed to produce about 3 gallons of milk a day winds up producing close to 50. So that estrogen toxicity is going into your body when you drink that. Not to mention that there's pus clusters that form on the tip of the cow. So you're getting pus cells dropped into that. And there's blood. And then there's antibiotics. So you're taking all of that into your body. Now, do you drink tap water? Because you can't filter out birth control pills. You can't filter out chemotherapy, or you can't filter out cholesterol-lowering drugs. There's certain things you can't filter out.
What we're trying to do, which is to remove toxins of some kind from the body, in this case we're talking about specifically aspartame, but it will happen with anything. We're trying to remove toxins from the body. They have to go somewhere. So they're coming out of whatever cells they're locked into. And for the most part in the body, we detox through the liver and the kidneys, although we can detox through the skin and infrared saunas and other ways. And those are, you can think of them as hoses. There's only a certain amount that can go through them before we're either going to overload them or back them up. What condition they're in will affect that. So a healing crisis is when we're trying to pull the toxins out faster than that person's body can handle it, and we end up having a backup situation, and somebody starts feeling really, really sick because we're mobilizing these poisons. They were locked up causing their damage. Now we need to get them out, so we're mobilizing them, but as we mobilize them, they have to have a place to go. And if we overload the pathways of detoxification, then the mobilization, although we do need them out, is overloading their only method of egress out of the body, and so we end up having somebody getting very sick.
What sometimes is perceived as a healing crisis, a couple of different things happen. One is once we stop shoving this substance into the body will start working, helping that substance, the toxin, to work its way back out of the body, and quite often it retraces the path through which it came in. So the brain symptoms will start being relieved. We will no longer have, the lethargy, the difficulty concentrating, but then some of the hormonal imbalances and the internal organ issues will remanifest. And then as those clear up, we get back to the little bit of aching and the joint and musculoskeletal problems. And then ultimately many people go back through the childhood phase, which is, the running nose, the rashes. And they consider that to be, really, that's what in America we consider to be acute illness, but that's what we consider illness. Everything else is just a weak tad bit of aging.
I do everything within my power when I'm working on any kind of detoxification with somebody, aspartame, mercury, whatever, to avoid the healing crises. And the way we do that is twofold. They're totally different, but they're doing the same thing. One is we want to pull things out at a speed that your body can handle. The other is we want to support all of the detox pathways to enable your body to handle a faster speed, so that something that maybe we could do in 6 months doesn't take 2 years. So I always, 100% of the time, every patient I see, regardless of what they come to me for, is going to go on kidney support and liver support, possibly at the same time, possibly a different order, it depends on the person. Generally for at least 2 months, possibly longer, before, almost always before, I start pulling out any kinds of toxicity.
Many people have come up with detox programs, and some doctors have set up aspartame detoxification clinics. And what this does for us, if somebody, for instance, is in Chicago and they're very, very ill, we can say that Dr. Pauline Harden is in Chicago, and they treat victims that, they know about aspartame, and they treat those victims. And the reason this is so important is they could go to some doctor, and because of all this propaganda, the doctors don't know anything about aspartame, and so they can't treat them.
Our main organs of elimination, well, the skin is a huge organ, and for some reason in our culture, allowing ourselves to excrete through the skin is almost, it's un-American, you can't sweat anymore. So we have to get those substances out some other way, and I frequently joke with my staff about how much more antiperspirant can we put on different areas of our body in order to not allow anything to come out.
Well, years ago, actually, when I first met Betty, and in Atlanta, she had talked about this aspartame toxicity issue and raised the serious question of how do we help people in need? How do we get this stuff out of their body? How do we help them to detoxify? And of course, my background in homeopathy is working clinically, working with chronic illness, and a focus on detoxification, particularly also with people that have addictions, whether it be alcohol, tobacco, even well, you could say food additives, because we know about the dangerousness of excitotoxins and their addictive nature. You almost have this compulsion or the cravings associated. If you've talked to anybody on diet sodas when they've tried to get off, it hasn't been easy. So we basically took our understanding of working on addiction and modified it slightly, but significantly, toward the breakdown components of aspartame. And we knew that we could stimulate the body's metabolism to pull those things out safely.
The nature of a homeopathic remedy, by the fact that it's a diluted substance, very much diluted, it takes on other characteristics and behavior, and of course the principle of homeopathy is like treats like. So if you have a substance that's toxic in its native form, if you dilute it out markedly, it'll detoxify and treat conditions that look similarly to that as if the individual took the toxin.
What are the options for somebody who has experienced some form of excitotoxic damage?
Options for reducing your damage primarily is avoiding the toxin is number one. You got to stay away from it. Your degree of sensitivity depends on how much you have to avoid it. If you're extremely sensitive, you have to be very meticulous in staying away from all these toxins. If you're not that sensitive, then you don't have to be quite as meticulous, but you should be wary of all of these excitotoxins. So avoidance is number one. Number two is a lot of things you can do to improve your resistance. For instance, we know that excitotoxins produce damage by producing free radicals in the brain. That destroys all the connections in the brain cells. So your antioxidant defenses give you a lot of protection. For instance, vitamin E and C and D, all of the antioxidant vitamins. Magnesium is a very powerful protectant. Your antioxidant enzymes are very protectant, like superoxide dismutase and glutathione and glutathione reductase. All of these things protect your brain and your nervous system against the toxicity. And they can be increased by increasing flavonoid intake from plants, like eating a lot of fresh vegetables. They contain substances that stimulate these enzymes to form. Also melatonin, which is used for most people to help you sleep. We find that it increases brain level of all these protective enzymes. So those things help.
Magnesium is the most important brain protectant. In this country, a large study of 37,000 normal people found that 75% were magnesium deficient, and 2/3 of those were serious magnesium deficiencies. That puts you at an enormously high risk of heart attack, stroke, and brain disorders. I used magnesium in my neurosurgical practice on all patients that were operated on. They got a big slug of magnesium. And I didn't have any of the complications my colleagues had. I didn't have any cardiac arrest, no strokes, no blood clots. None of these terrible things that are always happening to neurosurgeons ever happened. And it protected their brain. But I could not convince my colleagues, despite a pile of scientific literature this high, to change anything. That's another story.
It's so important that we keep our bodies hydrated because the nervous system controls everything. The muscles can support the nervous system. So if the muscles are contracted, they're putting pressure on the nervous system, and that can cause problems. If a muscle spasms, it can twist the bone out of place and pinch a nerve. And that might give you headaches. That might give you shoulder pain, arm pain, leg pain. However, about 85% of your nerves don't feel pain. For example, there's a nerve that goes to your heart, but you don't feel your heartbeat. There's a nerve that goes to your pancreas. Most people don't even know what the pancreas is. So if you pinch a nerve to an organ, that organ can malfunction. Now, what can cause a pinched nerve? A bone moving out of place and or a muscle spasm. So if we're drinking a lot of caffeinated drinks and that's causing the body to dehydrate, that's causing the muscles to spasm, that can cause problems as well. So it's important that we drink throughout the day. But what I want you to do is I want you to drink a lot of good things as opposed to a lot of bad things. And the other trick I love that when I teach people is that they say, well, I'm tired all the time. I need my coffee. I need my stimulants. I need my caffeine. If I can get somebody drinking a half gallon to a gallon of water a day, that's going to help detoxify the body, nourish the muscles, have the muscles fill up with water, so to speak, and they rehydrate them. And that gives them energy. And also the water breaks down to hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen gives them energy as well. Whenever I start getting tired, I know the first thing I have to do is rehydrate myself.
Our country is really suppressed with information from the traditional or conventional dermatology community that says that sun is going to cause cancer. Well, that's just not true. You never want to get sunburnt, of course, but if you have a proper omega-6 to 3 ratios, then if the sun really doesn't trigger cancer formation, assuming that you don't get burnt. That's a key thing. But actually not getting sun exposure causes 50,000 cancers a year. So that's a big one.
Because I believe in what's called the holy trinity of wellness. That means good food. Unfortunately, you have to have good supplements because our food has been robbed of all of its nutrients. The FDA said that we should eat 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. That's just to survive. Well, they changed that. I think it's up to 12 to 13. Our foods are destroyed. So you have to supplement. And then, so you're taking in good nutrition, good supplements, and exercise. You have to move. You have got to take this body and help it adapt to the physical and emotional stress of the world that we live in. That is your personal investment.
People might have a genetic predisposition to be affected by excitotoxins in different ways.
Yeah, for instance, if you take the gene, the ApoE4 gene, which is highly associated with heart attacks and strokes and Alzheimer's disease, if you inherit one of those genes, you have a much higher incidence of developing one of those diseases. If you have both genes, you're at an extremely high risk of developing these disorders and doing so at a very early age in your life. Now, the ApoE4 gene doesn't actually cause the disease. What it does is it puts you at high risk of the things that do cause it. For instance, we know strokes have to do with free radical generation in the blood vessel and the heart vessels. When you have both of those genes, you have very little antioxidant defenses. Therefore, when you smoke, which produces a lot of free radicals, you're going to develop heart attack and stroke at a much higher rate. If you're exposed to monosodium glutamate in your diet, which produces a lot of free radicals in your blood vessels, in your heart, in your brain, that means you're going to be at high risk of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's disease, and possibly Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's disease as well, because that gene has prevented you from having the protection most people would have against the full-blown effect of these excitotoxins.
There is a lot of research that's been done into genetics. For example, the first cancer gene that was found was the breast cancer gene. They found it years and years ago and they went, oh my goodness, we found the gene that causes breast cancer. Let's take a whole bunch of women with breast cancer and see if they all have the gene. And they found 10% did. And they've now looked at other different genes to see this. What happens is we have your genetics are not a sentence. Your genetics simply show a predisposition for something. And whether the genes, and the technical words are expressed, whether the genes express what they have imprinted into them is totally dependent on your toxic load, the foods you eat, the amount of essential fatty acids you get in, the stress level you're under, the amount of sunlight you get. Are you getting enough sunlight?
Usually if you have an indigenous culture that for many generations were eating the same foods, almost everyone within that culture will be the same metabolic type because they grew up in that area and they're just over many centuries their system became adjusted to that. Like the Inuit in the north where they're eating, those are the classic protein types, eat lots of protein, lots of fat, versus the people in many tropical areas that are classic carb types that eat very low protein, fat, and lots of carbohydrates. So the unfortunate thing with our country is that we're mixed hybrids. I mean, almost all of us have genetic heritage that's spread out all over the place. So you can have, within one specific family, you can have 3 kids and 2 parents, and each one of them could be a pretty significantly different metabolic type.
Personally, I followed what's called the Swank Diet. I think it was
from Swank magazine?
No, Roy Swank.
Oh, okay.
He was a doctor in, I think, the 1970s, and his diet was for MS specifically, but he dealt with low saturated fats.
I see.
In particular.
Treated a number of MS patients and initially followed the Swank protocol and was really confused because I'd never really saw tremendous results with them. Some people got better, and a lot of people got worse. And after, about 5 years ago or so, I realized as I was preparing for writing my book that answering the question as to what is the optimal amount of protein that one should eat, well, I didn't know. So I consulted with William Walcott, who wrote the book Metabolic Typing, and the answer is it depends. So just like with MS or any illness, there is no one perfect diet for everyone. There's some general principles, like everyone needs enough omega-3 fats. As I said, most of the time that involves either a fish or cod liver oil supplement because of the fish being contaminated. And then people should be avoiding sugar. I mean, sugar is not good for you, and avoiding obvious poisons like aspartame. With respect to the specific amount of carbohydrate that one should consume, or protein or fat, there's a wide variability. Some people need large amounts of fats and protein, something like an Atkins diet. Some people need more like a Swank diet or Dean Ornish, where they're having very low fat, low protein, lots of carbohydrates. Good carbohydrates, vegetable carbohydrates in every case. And then some people are in the middle. So metabolic typing is a system where we can actually ask people clinical questions, and they do this on a computerized basis, so the computer can, instead of taking 10 hours to figure it out, can do it out in seconds literally. But they can analyze this and make a prediction as to which type of system a person would best fall in.
So what about herbs and things, and what about your Chinese herbs JT was mentioning, and different things you could do?
Yes, I found, for my own self, I found acupuncture and Chinese herbs very helpful.
Because traditional is something that's been done for a long, long time. And what's been done for a long, long time cannot include drug-based medicine because it's new. It's 100 years old, it's 200 years old, depending on which drug you want to start with. But it certainly isn't more than 200 years old. Whereas the use of herbs and diet changes to help support the body's ability to heal in traditional Chinese medicine and in the medicine of India, which is called Ayurvedic medicine, we're talking about 30,000 years, 40,000 years, 50,000 years. Those are traditional forms of medicine, and that includes supporting the body's inherent healing abilities with, again, herbs, supplements, dietary changes. Whereas the use of drugs to suppress an undesirable symptom, which is what drugs are usually for, or in some cases to force the body to do something that it didn't want to do for some reason, and we've decided let's not find out why it didn't want to do that and see if we can get it to change. Let's just force it to do it with a drug. That's what drug-based medicine is for, to force the body to do something it isn't doing, or to prevent it from doing something that it was doing, or to stop a symptom that is undesirable. And how about helping the body to heal itself and letting the symptoms go away by themselves? That's traditional, and drug-based medicine should not be called traditional.
My name is Qing Liu. I'm a licensed acupuncturist in Arizona. I'm graduate from traditional Chinese medicine college from China. I practice acupuncture and Chinese herbs for 22 years. At the beginning, I saw Corey the 2002 March. At that time, she was sit down in a wheelchair, come to my office, and her physically and mentally all totally blocked. and she cannot walking, she cannot talking properly, and not thinking good. And I look at her, she just like cry to me, and her emotion was very bad. And I first check her pulse and look at her tongue and checked her some meridians. I found her totally blocked, all the channels, the energy blocked. So I gave her first treatment just to try to balance her meridian a little bit. And at the beginning, we start treatment 2 times a week. After a few times treatment, she walked to my office and started to smiling to me and talk a little bit about her. Then we start once a week treatment. Her condition looks much improved, and she can think more clearly and talk to me more clearly. And every time her emotion changed much, and physically she can feel more movement and walking better.
The way that us natural physicians look at the doctor-patient relationship, first of all, it's the cornerstone of medicine. It's a great healer. It's important for our society to have physicians that have relationships with patients, that know who they're treating, and that patients have respect and know their physicians. It's a partnership. What we really want is people who take the responsibility for their own health and are willing to explore and understand things that affect them, coming to someone who has training and experience in working with people who have various diseases and problems, and working together to come up with an acceptable means of treatment for the patient.
And what I observe and what I believe absolutely affects the outcome. And we know that. There's like voodoo death, you know? It's like you're going to die. And if I have a relationship with you that you consider me to be the shaman, and it's our culture and it's my village, and I say you're going to die, you're going to die. My saying it is going to cause you to die because you're going to take that in and you're going to die. So if I can say I die, yeah, that's the nocebo effect. So, you know, let's turn that around. I'm not going to die. I'm going to live. Not only am I going to live, I'm going to flourish and I'm going to prosper. But, you know, it means we have to take care of ourselves. And we have to lead correct lives, okay? And we have to consider what we're eating and what we're doing and our relationships and our family, our neighborhood, and in the world.
I'm writing a book right now called Are You Sure You Want to Live? Because Dying's so much easier. It's like, I have people that come to me, oh, my doctor just gave me 4 months to live, and I want to live. I go, are you sure? I want to live. Are you prepared to give up all your meat right now, your dairy, your diet sodas, your smoking, your drinking, juice, organic fruits and vegetables, take a ton of supplements, drink 10 times the amount of water you've ever drunk in your life, learn to meditate, walk, breathe in the air, study about ozone, study about frequency machines, study about whatever. Wow, that's a lot of work. I won't have time for anything else.
Well, you won't have time for anything else if you don't do it.
Yeah, I had a girl willing to do it all, except for she goes, I have to give up my meat? I said, well, it's not forever, but I need to eliminate the hormones in your body. Oh, I can't do that. I said, even if it could possibly save your life. Oh, well, I can't do that. I said, okay.
I think that over time we tried to go to court over it, and this was, when was this? 90, I think it was like 96, something like that. And they did a lot of checking into it, and the lawyer was a friend of my dad's, and he's a well-known person, and he had his people did a lot of research into it and found that there's definitely something going on out there, but that we would have to hire or pay off a researcher, scientist to testify for us, because he would be blackballed from working in his industry. And that to do that, it was going to take a lot of money for this person to be able to, to do this and then have enough money to live on until he could overcome what he had just done, to the pharmaceutical industry. And he said, and it's going to take at least $500,000 just to get it to present the case. And he said, right now we're about 5 years before the science. And he said, another thing that you need to think about is, are you willing to live your life this way and be so upset and caught up in this case? Or would it be better for you to do what you can for Katrina and go on with your lives from here and try to make the best of it? And because it's so emotional, it's so draining, and you're just completely, all the anger and all the hurt, you can't continue to live that way and indefinitely, and not knowing when this was gonna come to an end, or when we were gonna get some financial help for her. We made the decision then that we weren't going to pursue it, and that we needed to wait. If we did anything, that it was going to be to help other people be more aware of it, and wait and see.
Our membership is definitely growing, I would almost say by leaps and bounds. It's the scientific validation of traditional foodways, and particularly showing why these traditional methods, the choices and the methods have great validity in maximizing nutrients in our food. Food's rich in vitamin A and D, liver and butter and egg yolks, all from pastured animals, the very foods that we're being told not to eat. So this is the number one message that we have. Beyond that, we want genuine broth being made, on local level. Also, universal access to clean raw milk. We want to get our animals out of factories and back into this mixed farm model that I presented. And the right of farmers to sell their products directly to the public. This is very important change that we need.
Simply making wise choices at the supermarket and then informing the manufacturers and the grocers and the restaurants we don't want to eat genetically modified foods is a way to take down this dangerous experiment. I went to a restaurant locally and I said, a lot of us don't want to eat genetically modified foods. Can you take them out of your ingredients for the restaurant? He invited me back to his kitchen, said, what's genetically engineered? I said, you have to change the oil and the dairy products have to be from a different source, and that's about it. He made the change, and I wrote about it in the local paper. It increased the traffic to his store, and now restaurants all over are competing to be the non-GM restaurant. So there's 7 or 8 in this town that say no genetically engineered ingredients.
And so a lot of people say, oh, I'm a vegetarian because I don't believe in cruelty to animals. I didn't start out that way. I started out because I wanted to detox. It was purely a physical and vanity thing, too. I wanted to look good and get my body back to shape. But little by little, it evolved into more of a spiritual level. I'm known as the world's vegan bodybuilder. I was squatting 315 pounds and benching 235, and I was a big gal. I frustrate the hell out of my agent because, oh, I got a commercial for you. Oh, what is it? It's underarm deodorant. Can't do that. What? Well, it's got aluminum chloride, and that can cause lymphatic backup, and I'm not going to do anything like that. Oh, God. Oh, I got a commercial for you. It's, Crystal Light. Come on, it's got aspartame. I don't do anything. Well, how are we supposed to know? So they got me a Taco Bell commercial one time because they needed a bodybuilder and something like that. And I didn't know what I went out for, but when I found out that it was a Taco Bell commercial, and then they offered me the job. And I said, I can't, I'm a vegetarian. And they go, well, what's the problem? I said, I can't eat that meat and cheese. And they go, we have buckets you can spit it out in. And I said, no, you don't understand. I was just on the cover of Vegetarian Times. I can't come out and do that. I've known actors that claim to be vegetarians and then all of a sudden they're doing a meat commercial. I can't do that. I cannot spiritually and morally use my image to sell something that I believe is killing people.
We're a nonprofit organization, and we are composed of parents all over the country, as well as professionals who have appreciated the importance of letting people know that certain food additives can trigger a lot of problems. There are just, of all the additives that are out there are only a handful that are really serious problems that we focus on. And these are things that can trigger problems in behavior, they can trigger learning difficulties, and they can also have a wide effect on various health issues.
I didn't start out not trusting doctors, but they were working alongside doctors for so many years who would summarily put these kids on substances like Ritalin. And they would never tell parents, oh, by the way, your kid could die from this. They would never say, I've been in so many medication evaluations and reviews, and doctors spend a short amount of time. They are basically unskilled at the component of how to turn kids around in other ways. So they have a kid in their office, and for the most part, what they do gets them a bird's eye view of the child getting worse right there in front of them, because they feed into the child getting worse in their office. And so typically within 15 minutes they're writing a prescription, having never met this child before. So it occurred to me that they only have one gear, which is medication A, B, C, D. They're trying to help, but they don't have any other alternatives.
Over the years, we will occasionally get handwriting samples that moms keep. They will see a difference in their child's handwriting as a result of going on the Feingold program, and we've kept these over the years, and these are some that we think are quite dramatic. If you can see that red bordered one there, that's Mike Smith. And Mike's all grown up now, but he was 5 years old, 5.5 years old actually, when he wrote that. And you'll see reversals, you'll see, I'm sure he was called dyslexic back then. They hadn't yet invented ADHD, so that probably wasn't.
When did that come about?
I believe that came about shortly after that handwriting sample was done.
That's in 81?
Yes, in 81. It was just sort of getting going, but it was still hyperkinesis, minimal brain dysfunction, learning disabilities, HLD. I mean, the initials just go on and on and on. And there's always new ones being invented. But Mike was having trouble. His behavior was a problem. Now, in his case, he also had symptoms that showed up in his handwriting. Not everybody has that, but in Mike's case, you can see he was reversing letters. He was just having a lot of trouble. His mom put him on the Feingold program, and 3 weeks later, you'll see from February 25th, this is March 16th, this is the same child. And the only difference was that his mom stopped giving him foods with the synthetic dye, the artificial colors,
that's amazing,
etc. The synthetic sweeteners weren't as big a factor then. But on the Feingold program, his handwriting went from that to that. The Feingold Association gets its name because the parents selected the name to honor the doctor who had really been the pioneer in this area. He was considered a pioneer in both the fields of allergy and immunology. So he was a pediatrician, he was an allergist and immunologist. He taught, he wrote extensively. He was quite an amazing man. And he found out, quite to his surprise, that some of his patients who were having various problems were reacting to some of these food additives. Now, this was all back in the mid-1960s.
What are some of the ramifications of a child who's diagnosed with?
Well, first of all, the diagnosis stays with the child forever. It doesn't go away. It stays in the medical clearinghouse of information. So when it comes time when that child reaches adulthood to be insured, wanting insurance, they may not be insurable. They may not be able to qualify for military service, which may be a good thing, but they may be eliminated just by virtue of having been on stimulant medications.
The school lunch program was developed to feed children who were malnourished, children who came to school and couldn't learn because they didn't have enough food to eat. So partly to get rid of agricultural subsidies and also, or the excesses that the farmers had, and also to raise healthier children, the school started feeding children. And at first it worked really well, but gradually what had become initially been a solution and a very positive thing has actually become the biggest problem.
Parents are probably sending them to school with a Coca-Cola and a donut, and you wonder why you have to spatulate them off the walls. Oh, they're hyper, they're ADD. Everybody's being diagnosed ADD, ADHD, PDD, or how many acronyms can we come up with? And nobody assesses their diet, or have they brain scanned them to see if they truly have a problem. They're being diagnosed off 6 little things, like, do you fidget?
All the way through the work I've done with difficult kids and having a clinic and seeing how quickly kids can recover, that 3-4 weeks later, all these kids who've been put on medication and who have had this diagnosis, 3-4 weeks later, the child would be incredible. And we were able to get the child off medication. Or all these kids who had the diagnosis who would have been clearly put on medication if they saw the doctor first, were able to scoot past that. So it started occurring to me, why even go down this road in the first place? Why even put kids on these very harsh substances? Ritalin is a class 2 narcotic in the same category as morphine, heroin, and cocaine. It's chemically equivalent to cocaine. How many parents who have their kids on these substances know that that's the case? Never.
So the special ed budget in my county is greater than the entire high school budget for the whole county. What if some of those children didn't need to be in special ed? I know, and my colleagues know, and our parents know, that many of these children could be in a mainstream classroom. What if you could mainstream half of the children? What's half of 186 million? How many wonderful programs could you have? How many taxpayers could be relieved of the spiraling increase in their real estate taxes? How many classrooms could be reduced in size? How many teachers could get a salary increase? That's a lot of money. And it's a high price to pay because they're earning a relatively tiny amount of money from the vending machines and from cutting back on the quality of the food in the cafeteria.
Head Start in Tucson is an organization that has 80 classrooms. Well, actually, it's over 100 now, and they have 3,000 kids each year, 3,000 new kids. And what's remarkable is it's a disadvantaged population. So these kids traditionally are more at risk for mental health issues and for being referred from evaluations and medications. Head Start used to have a whole department for mental health services, and they used to spend a lot of money on this whole conglomerate of issues. And they came to me at a point where they had numerous classrooms that were out of control. So 5 years later, they, maybe 12 or 13,000 kids later, they've had 0 referrals to the mental health system. They've had 0 referrals of these children for evaluations and medications, which is, it couldn't happen by chance. Something happened that allowed them to, and of course they're still getting kids at risk, but they have an approach to handling these kids at risk. And so they could help not only these kids flourish, but they help all their kids flourish because they adapted a more powerful approach than an ordinary approach. And the interesting sidebar is all the money that they saved by not spending it on mental health services, it's enabled them to go from 2,000 kids a year to 3,000 kids a year. It was that much more money came into the system. Not new funding, but with money that was already there that was being wasted on special ed services, on mental health services, treatment, family therapy, all kinds of things.
In Native communities around the country, Native Americans are the highest minority to have diabetes. The Donna Autumn people are the highest minority group in the world that has diabetes. So when you hear that, it's big news. I mean, it's really devastating, but it's also, I think people here get so used to that, seeing that, okay, eventually I will get diabetes or someone in their family has diabetes.
Because we have my friend Jim across the street over there. He has diabetes, and I'm not sure if he got rid of it yet, but my diabetes is just a little bit different. There's type 1 and type 2, but there's coming out to type 3. So type 2, which I don't have, I have type 1. Type 1 is when your pancreas doesn't work. Type 2 is when you get really big.
There's a new syndrome being described. Suddenly we're seeing this all over the United States, Syndrome X, where people have a combination of hypertension, diabetes, elevated blood lipids, and obesity. What happens when you feed animals MSG as infants? They develop diabetes, they develop elevated blood lipids and obesity. In other words, they're developing Syndrome X. If you feed it to them long enough, they'll develop the hypertension. So we're exactly reproducing in the experimental animals MSG, Syndrome X, which we're seeing an explosion of in the United States.
Can you tell me a little bit about the benefits of some of these foods?
Sure. I actually see two different types of benefits. More on the cultural side, the Autumn Himatak, the desert people's ways, keeping the culture alive, having the benefits of cultural preservation, language preservation, ceremonies, with the tippery beans that you see here on the table, it's always in our legends, and when people look at the bean, you're not just looking at a bean, you're looking at a whole culture that holds a song, that holds stories, that holds ceremonies. I mean, one of the stories that we know of is the Milky Way is made of beans thrown up by coyote, and on that level, that's a benefit. There's also the nutritional value benefits, which, in the foods that we gather from the desert and from the field, they have this chemical makeup called extracellular mucilage, which has been proven to regulate the blood sugar in the body, which is very beneficial for diabetics, but also for someone who just wants to eat healthy and benefit from the nutritional value of the foods they collect. I can't just go to a grocery store and buy these foods. I have to actually go, to my backyard, which is actually a grocery store for desert people, because every plant, every thing that you see in the desert has some kind of meaning and some kind of use to it, be it to eat food, but also medicinal purposes. A lot of this can be medicines, and I've seen the benefits. I just started because for myself, I wasn't aware of these things. I had to learn a lot of these things.
It's pretty sad now that a lot of our young people have lost interest. So it's up to the older generation to bring it back, and that's why we're doing all this too. Because a lot of our kids, our public kids, are learning from us. What kind of foods we got that we might want to bring back. Instead of potato chips and bologna. Bologna is Indian steak. They used to call it Indian steak, but hey, that's a stereotype. No more.
Who called it an Indian steak?
We do. Not us, there's a lot of Southwest people.
Round steak.
Round steak, there he goes.
Earlier, I was mentioning that we couldn't get 100 pounds of the tepary beans. But now with the farm and other farms growing tepary beans, you can get it now. We sell it to the local grocery store here. We sell it to the mom and pop, the little grocery stores on the reservation. We also provide it to some of the services like the elderly services and some of the schools. The hospital, we sell our beans to them so they can actually, serve it to their patients.
This is an important day for us. We're here to celebrate our culture, our food, our games. The reason why we're here is because of the farm, and you saw and you ate some of the food that came from the farm, or you're going to later on. But the whole idea is to bring everybody together and have fun and have games and meet and mingle and meet your relatives from afar. So we just want to give thanks and show our appreciation to each and every one of you guys and all your representatives here, because this is so important. What we're doing here today is so important because we have to remember these foods that we're growing here, we're growing for the people. A lot of times right now we're in the time where the food is killing us. The food that we're eating now, the food that we're buying in the stores are killing us. Diabetes, cancer, heart problems. It's all coming from the bad foods that we get in our grocery stores. What we're doing here is we're growing the foods that our ancestors and our grandparents not too long ago were eating. The good, healthy foods that we're supposed to be eating, what the Creator gave to us. Can anybody name any of the foods? Here on. Wow, those foods, Jordan, those are the foods that we need to eat and we can't forget. Because when we go back to those foods, we get healthy. We become strong. It's awesome people. You want to remember that. You wanted those children that you brain that you saw running around. You want them to remember them. And don't forget them and eat them. Because they're the ones that are going to be coming after you guys are gone, after we are gone. And we don't want them to be going to the hospital and coming back with one leg. We don't want them to be hooked up to a machine to clean their blood. We don't want that for them. We want them to be healthy.
Baba,